Ah, yeah. I'm trying to keep my screen on. In that case, I can go back and edit it later on. Everybody's get that. Okay, I think I'll do it. You kidding me? Good. What should we do? You got to take it possible. What do you think? Look like the if you really want to get serious, you gotta go with the top notch application. They good both times. It seems like the more you learn, it's just the same shit. You gotta really. No, Mike, you getting right here. I gotta get in my way. No, 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 no. I gotta get it done. I got neighbors trying to brag my wins, my shoulders. Why are you doing that? I'm not tired. You're straight in front of me. Oh, okay, I'm just going to go. That's what it is. I see that I get calm. Okay, I just application will do it to send them like that. No, I download something. Yeah, no, no, Mike. No, no. It's like I lied, and run. up towards the end. It's big. It's big. Only thing you gonna do is go in. It's kind of weird. I like it. The corner, but they got corners. Let's read. I know I can get her this. I was really okay. Close and reopen. That's what we gotta do. Okay. Very funny. So far. Fun. I'm gonna look up Learn. Microsoft Learn again. And Microsoft, if you don't seem like one, change. So you guys have to let them know features. Oh, I got the user training. Just click on it. Maybe it's won't be long after. Here we go. Here we go. This is how. We got shit on.
Introduction. 100 XP. 2 minutes. When C++ was first developed, it was modeled as an extension of the C language. C++ was designed to support procedural, object-oriented, and generic programming. It's a compiler-based programming language. Plus was first developed, it was modeled as an extension of the C language. C++ was designed to support procedural, object-oriented, and generic programming. It's a compiler-based programming language, so it's statically typed and case-sensitive. The uses of C++ are limitless. Here are some examples of where C++ is used. Web browsers. C++ is used to create web browsers and their plugins and extensions. Operating systems. C++ is used to build operating systems. Many versions of Windows were in part written in C++. The Symbian OS is mostly written in C++. Compilers. Compilers for languages like C# and Java are written in C++. In fact, many C++ compilers are written in C++. Media applications. C++ is used to create media applications and to manage audio and video files. C++ is used in applications that implement real-time audio, like audiobooks and apps that transcribe video. Database engines. C++ has been used to develop database applications, including MySQL. Games. A wide variety of animation and games require C++ for modeling, 3D animation, rendering, and simulations. Game engines that developers use to create games frequently are built by using C++. Medical engineering. Developers who work in medical engineering are creating more applications by using C++. C++ is widely used in machines that use scanning technology, like MRI. C++ is also used in various embedded systems. Robotics. A robotics developer often will use C++ to program the microcontroller, to improve performance and productivity. Numerous hardware libraries are written in C++ for interactions with low-level hardware. Scenario. You work on a team of developers, and you're looking to evaluate C++. You want to determine whether C++ might be a good fit for the applications you and your team build. What's important for your team and for your company is to develop applications that are fast and memory efficient. The language also needs to be common, with a large community to ensure support for issues and access to tutorials. What will you learn? In this module, you'll learn to write a program in C++ by using basic syntax. Syntax. Recognize C++ terminology, including data types, libraries, and functions. Identify and correct common programming errors. What is the main goal? This module shows you how to write your first C++ program, and it helps you gain confidence in developing in C++. Next unit, exercise, create your first C++ program. Continue. Need help? See our troubleshooting guide or provide specific feedback by reporting LL not be charged. The sandbox may only be used to complete training on Microsoft Learn. Use for any other reason is prohibited and may result in permanent loss of access to the sandbox. Microsoft provides this lab experience and related content for educational purposes.
Well,
All
thank you,
presented
Microsoft.
information is owned by Microsoft and intended.
Thank you, Microsoft. Been almost passed on. So this came up, you're watching me at this point. No, I'm doing. I know. I know. Sandbox. What are Microsoft? No, I don't know if I can get that. Oh, bad boy. I had to call him. Hey, I know y'all want some money, but man, it's kind of, I'm already trying to go back. Oh, this it's not a broo. It's not a
Frequently asked questions. Article. November 9. What are the Microsoft Learn sandboxes? The Microsoft Learn sandboxes are free environments that you can use to explore Azure and other products through Microsoft Learn training modules. Why do I need a sandbox? Most of the Microsoft Learn training content involves exercise units where students create real things in Azure, such as virtual machines or Azure functions, to practice what they're learning. You use the sandbox to complete these lessons without a paid Azure subscription. Most of the lessons don't require you to install any local development tools. You can build apps that utilize Azure services right in the Microsoft Learn sandbox. Do I need an Azure account to use a sandbox? No. All you need is a Microsoft account to sign in with. If you don't have one, you can create one for free. Can I use the sandbox if I already have an Azure subscription? Yes. The sandbox works independently from your regular subscriptions. While you're practicing and learning with Microsoft Learn, you can use the sandbox. When you're ready to create real resources, you can use your Azure subscription. How do I activate the sandbox? The sandbox is available in every module that contains a hands-on Azure exercise. Each unit includes a prompt at the top of the page to indicate the sandbox status. It initially looks like this.
Okay, I'm come on, you know how to wait for my
Exercise, create your first C++ program.
let's say 3 hours. That's all exactly what it was. We don't just to take everything. Yeah, no, that's it. It's 6 o'clock. Can't do it. Crazy. You have used one or two things like this more tomorrow. I like that. Yeah.
Exercise, create. In this exercise, you'll become familiar with a C++ program and how to run it. You'll write a Hello World program that prints this phrase as output. You'll also learn some basic C++ terminology and syntax. To write code, you need a text editor and a compiler. To write this program, you'll use the G++ compiler. G++ is available for all major operating systems. Create a code file. You'll use the sandbox on your right to create a code file that you can build and run. The sandbox comes with a runtime for C++ and exposes the G++ compiler. The sandbox also has an editor that you can use to type your code in. Later, you can use either the Visual Studio Code Editor or the full Visual Studio IDE to build larger and more Later, you can use either the Visual Studio Code Editor or the full Visual Studio IDE to build larger and more interesting code examples, and even entire applications. In the terminal, run code. To open an editor. In the sandbox editor that opens, write
Well, right, okay. Sandbox, this is a terminal. I'm alright. Right, okay, so, that's good. Okay. Can I connect to this remote? Actually, go right there. Include auto saving Jones. I messed up. I would play, I can fall with make teacher. This is only a good transition because explain how and why the code works. So first, you should see running. You see it running. So you can, so you can be sure that it didn't, you didn't enter it correctly. That's exactly why I like enter it. The cool. Yeah, I think a control F. Control Oh, they ain't even a constant. That's a fucking. You just see how it's something in ten. Run your code. Now I feel better.
You should see the output hello world.
Thank
Output. Copy. User at Azure, $code hello.cpp user at Azure, $G++ hello.cpp user at Azure, $/a.out hello world. User at Azure, $. Part of your code prints a line of output after it runs. Inside main in your code, add // at the start of the line of code you wrote. This syntax turns the line into a code comment, which the compiler ignores. Then, create these lines of code or paste in the following snippet. Tip. To edit the previous hello.cpp, type code hello.cpp.
I think that only returns it. I don't think I need a fix for this. It's better if I use try. I thought try. Yeah. You know something? Something right here. Draw code. Draw violation. Okay. No, I don't need to have maybe like she's not talking. Hey, the flash. I know that one time I didn't know that it must have. Now I'm saying also Nicole comment the hair is very compared to ignore checking on what is primary job for the provider, primary job of the spelling and code. The provider primary compiler primary convert should go into executable that the computer can understand. Which of the following statements is true though? Because that is considered the is a function double quote. How program impact program breaking down the key changes you insight into the concept behind language structure breakdown. A better understanding of what's going on helpful because we the syntax of the program and line by line. Nah, got into the top of the way. Let's get include IO string. It's part of the standard library. Many components and the program are defined either by a standard library or by a library that you are third party, right? Okay. Code uses an IO string, which is part of a standard library to use object cout to print something as output. Hmm. Hmm. Try to get this stuff. I think you could if you gonna build a why not ask your question, ask yourself questions and see the question maybe or something. So using it standard inputs like that. Ooh. A namespace helps you prevent name conflict name conflicts in large projects. You want to use the functionalities of the namespace throughout the code without repeatedly calling the namespace when it's required. So you don't declare a namespace at the beginning of the code. Also, the syntax that required to use cout is cout and standard input. Like standard, oh, that's what it says, standard uh, out, standard out. By adding the line using namespace standard, you do not need to repetitively use standard. Okay. Mm-hmm. Int main. A function is set as a statement that the program uh, that that performs a task together. Main is a global function and designed that is programmed. That's a started program. Every C++ program has a mandatory main function. The int used to use before main says that this function expects an integer to be returned. I knew that already. I'm still wondering what's up. C probably had an iterate through these. Standard are um, specific string as output. Maybe that's character output. Standard output is part of a collection output. Is part of a collection of data that operates of the standard OS string class. Cout, people could all do. Cout is on that. I don't know how. I don't know. Right up there. Hello world. The output hello world is a set of double quotes. You can use SCD string in many ways. The main two ways to use standard string are as a C string character array. Okay. Or as a string class is a primitive as a string class. Character is a primitive data type. That is not so much primitive. I forgot. Thank you. Why use different data types like integer, float, double, and char express? String expression store value. For example, an integer might be 132, a float might be 902, and a character might be 8. The integers determine the string and move to the next line. It's called a escape sequence function algorithm. I'm not gonna remember all that. Or might as well better than just what if I have Kim intelligent like what's the difference? What's going on? What's on the move? And the output. Return zero when you declare that the main function you specify int to declare. First return the integer if the function is preceded by int a specific integer return. By using return zero, you make sure that the integer return with a complete integer. Here return is to make an efficient developer, it's crucial that you recognize programming errors and make programming errors and know how to fix them. In this unit, you will become familiar with some common mistakes and have some error codes they produce. Here's a summary of common errors you'll likely to encounter as if you begin to learn this. Wrong uppercase. Here's some kind of errors you'll likely encounter. Wrong uppercase. C++ is case sensitive. Oh, it is. I know that. Case sensitive. Case method. If you use the wrong case in your code, the compiler won't recognize the command you're trying to use. Wrong string operator. It's important to use the correct operator. Examples are when you identify the string to output. Identify the string to output or when you're reading information. Wrong quote type. A single character requires single quote. Single character requires single quote. Single characters. Single words of more than one character requires double. Did I get that wrong earlier? Why did you give me? Does it sound like you're doing a wrong quote type? A single character with a single character. One. He requires single quote. Yeah, missing semicolon. That's time. Wrong uppercase. Wrong stream operator. I already had it. Call them thanks for listening now. Wrong quote type. Meaning missing exercise 6. Version code. I'm pretty sure I can do that. No problem. It's helpful if you identify the error. Create the code. Before you identify errors, create code and help how to look at it. Materially, code. Let me just look over here. Let me see what I got to do here. You see my small characters. Is it telling me that? I think they are. Look through this check. Oh, here it was telling me to check. Oh, to check whether refresh. You get good at reading. So you know this fire is look at it and determine the run code. Open the editor and editor insert code. Okay, business code. Include this input. Oh no, it's not input at all. It's just stuff about what input. Hello, baby. You forgot a lie. Is it saying? I just hate that Joan, right? Listen, nice. Premium back as well. Ooh, how do you see that? Alright, so he did not return. Yes, no. We got this from the phone. Go back. Oh, God. Enhancement area extra semicolon. Dot umbilical. Oh no, that was the last. The semicolon is better than you can't add a semicolon. Actual include directly. Use a semicolon only for any statement. A semicolon remove the semicolon. We never had time to save it. Remove the semicolon. I already did it. Because it's the wrong quotation is still illegal. That's okay. Application. His game going now. Don't start the other way around. That's what I'm trying to say. My truth, I'm trying to pass it. And I think it's just characters. Maybe characters. It might be. Function name. Hello, oh, got it. Message. I did the message. Name. I don't know how I'm trying to run code and all that and still, I mean, that's clearly error thing there. I'm just trying to, it changed the structure. So, to be inspiration. Okay. just leave it alone. I wasn't declared in this boat. I feel like a whipper, huh? You know, you know what I'm saying? You don't like that. You don't like that. Okay, yeah. You working there. Okay. It's like control. Control. Oh, I think they just don't let me be running period. Okay, y'all got the yeah, that's not even me. They probably let me do this. The other one's old. Shorty. This isn't too bad. It's not bad at all. Yeah. Who the fuck? Wait, count. Okay. So the reason is that the word primarily is used as an action. didn't have I got an old one. I'm gonna see.
Shit to be up. I need that shit to be up. I need that shit to be up.
Do my work, you know, and I need to hey. This module, you know how to access whether it's Google code, like over this or how to real code government also examine the free code to edit finally we walk through this whatever. This is related to
This module doesn't contain coding exercises. So, if you already know Visual Studio Code is the code editor you want to use, you might prefer to skip this module and check out Setup Visual Studio Code instead. In that module, we guide you through the steps to download, customize, and start using Visual Studio Code.
I want my points.
By the end of this module, you're able to
My points, please. This is so
Introduction to Visual Studio Code. 16 minutes. Learning objectives. By the end of this module, you're able to evaluate whether Visual Studio Code is an appropriate source code editor for your development work. Describe how Visual Studio Code can be customized with extensions to configure a development environment to meet your needs. Start. Add. Prerequisites. Basic familiarity with code editors or integrated development environments, IDEs, and their features such as source control and debugging. Basic understanding of the concept of using software plugins or extensions to customize applications. This module is part of these learning paths. Introduction to Azure. Introduction 2 minutes. What is Visual Studio Code? 3 minutes. How Visual Studio Code works for Introduction 100 XP 2 minutes. Whether you're a beginning or an experienced developer, you need the right coding tool to create, edit, manage, run, and debug code. There are many different tools available. Some are essentially simple text editors. Others, such as integrated development environments, IDEs, can have many advanced features and built-in support for multiple programming languages. The trade-off for full-featured IDEs is that they often have a larger installation footprint and a steeper learning curve than simpler code editors. So how do you know which coding tool is right for you? It depends on what your needs are. For example, what programming languages are you using? Do you need to integrate with a source control management, SCM, provider such as GitHub? Example scenario. Suppose you're building a website for a restaurant in your hometown. You know that you want to create the pages using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. In addition, you'd like to be able to debug your code and view your site locally on your computer as you're testing. You also want to incorporate a version control system to manage changes to your web pages. In addition, suppose the restaurant needs to create an inventory management system in C++ for their employees to use from desktops in the kitchen and back office. You want to make sure that your code editor supports C++ syntax, libraries, compilers, and debuggers. Furthermore, suppose the restaurant's chef asks if you can help them with data analytics. The chef would like you to examine trends in sales of pizza when the local sports clubs win matches or games. You're comfortable using Python and Jupyter notebooks for your data science work and want a code editor that supports that language and tool. What will we be doing? In this module, we help you evaluate if Visual Studio Code is the right code editor for various scenarios. You also learn about the Visual Studio Code features that you can customize and configure to support many different types of development work. What is the main goal? By the end of this module, you have the knowledge to be able to evaluate if Visual Studio Code meets your set of programming requirements. Note: you may have heard about other products in the Visual Studio family, such as Visual Studio and Visual Studio for Mac, and wonder if they're related to Visual Studio Code. They are different products. Visual Studio is a full-featured IDE for Windows development, and Visual Studio for Mac is an IDE that runs on Mac OS and is used for developing .NET applications. Next unit, what is Visual Studio Code? Continue. Need help? See our troubleshooting guide or provide specific feedback by reporting an issue. What is Visual Studio Code? 100 XP. 3 minutes. Visual Studio Code is a free, lightweight source code editor that can be customized through extensions to support many different programming needs. What are the main features of Visual Studio Code? Among all your choices of code editors and IDEs, Visual Studio Code provides some of the best features of both types of tools. Like many code editors, it has a small installation footprint, so it starts up quickly and provides a fast, responsive editing experience. Like many IDEs, Visual Studio Code supports debugging tools, source control integration, and hundreds of programming languages. And Visual Studio Code provides these capabilities without the overhead that full-featured IDEs often have that make them slow to load and work with. Let's take a look at the key features of Visual Studio Code. Cross-platform support. Visual Studio Code's user interface, UI, is based on Electron, a cross-platform technology for building desktop applications. This technology lets Visual Studio Code run on Linux, Mac OS, or Windows. The benefit of this versatility is that you can use the same familiar coding environment on whatever platform you're using. For example, you can use Visual Studio Code as you work on a web application on Windows. Later, if you need to work from a Linux host, you can install and use Visual Studio Code there to edit Python scripts. You don't have to learn how to use different editors to work on different operating systems. The following screenshot shows the Windows, Linux, and Mac OS downloads available on the Visual Studio Code homepage. Full-featured code editor. Visual Studio Code's editor is based on the Monaco editor technology that provides a workbench to create and edit code. The editor has rich features such as code syntax coloring, bracket matching, and IntelliSense as shown in the following screenshot. These features help you write and refactor your code more efficiently. Explorer. Visual Studio Code has an Explorer to organize and manage files and folders containing your code. This feature enables you to create, save, find, and open files and folders without having to switch to a file manager application. Search. You can use Visual Studio Code's search capability to look for terms within a file or across multiple files. The search feature also provides advanced options for matching patterns. For example, you could exclude HTML file types from your search by specifying the pattern /.html. In addition, you can search for and replace terms within a file or multiple files as shown in the following screenshot. Integrated terminal. Visual Studio Code integrates your system terminal within the UI so that you can run commands within your working directory without having to switch to another window or application. For example, while working on a web application, you can run Node Package Manager (npm) commands without having to open a separate terminal window. Integrated debugger. Visual Studio Code integrates with many debuggers so that you can run and debug code within the UI. You can set breakpoints and inspect the values of variables, and you can use the debug toolbar to help you start debugging, pause, or step through code. Integrated source control. Visual Studio Code lets you manage your code with Git-compatible tools. You can perform actions such as committing changes to repositories that reside in a remote source control management (SCM) provider such as GitHub. You can run Git commands in the Visual Studio Code's integrated terminal or use the GUI-based Git tools in the source control view. Extensibility through extensions. You can add more features and functionality beyond what's in the initial download of Visual Studio Code. You can add support for other programming languages, frameworks, themes, and tools. For example, a few of the many C++ extensions available in the marketplace are displayed in the following screenshot. Next, let's take a look at how to use these features of Visual Studio Code. Next unit, how Visual Studio Code works. Continue. Need help? How Visual Studio Code works. 100 XP. 4 minutes. Now that you're familiar with the key features of Visual Studio Code, let's see how Visual Studio Code works, what capabilities you get out of the box, and what you can add through the extensions marketplace. Visual Studio Code has a lightweight footprint. Out of the box, Visual Studio Code provides UI with the editor, explorer, search, debugger, source control, terminal, and extensions features. Support for several languages, including HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and TypeScript. Integration with Git for source control. Integration with Node.js for running and debugging JavaScript. For some developers, all that is needed is this initial install to get started on their web application projects. But most developers want to add more tools and support for other languages by installing extensions. What are extensions? Extensions are code packages that plug into the Visual Studio Code UI and add support for features such as themes to change the look and feel of the UI color scheme or the style of file icons displayed in the Explorer. Productivity tools such as linters or code beautifiers. Other programming languages such as C++, Python, and hundreds more. Debugging support. You can add what you need to Visual Studio Code quickly and leave out what you don't need. Where do you get the extensions? You can search for, download, and install extensions from the Extensions Marketplace within Visual Studio Code, which integrates with the Visual Studio Marketplace. For example, you can search by categories such as formatters, programming languages, or themes. The following screenshot displays a few of the many extensions available in the Formatters category. When you find an extension you want to add, select Install. Who built the extensions? Microsoft publishes many popular extensions, including C/C++, Python, and Docker. Third parties such as individuals or companies like Red Hat also create and publish extensions for the marketplace. Most extensions are free. However, some providers charge a fee to download and use their extensions. The publisher is listed below the extension name. Scenario. Now, let's apply this knowledge about how Visual Studio Code works and see how we might set up Visual Studio Code in our scenario. Recall that in the first part of the scenario, you want to build a website for a local restaurant. To accomplish this, you decide to build a Node.js application. Here's what you do. First, you download and install the Visual Studio Code version appropriate for your computer's platform, Windows, Mac OS, or Linux. Next, you launch Visual Studio Code and using the built-in terminal, you install a Node.js package that helps you scaffold a basic Node.js application. Scaffolding creates several files needed to run a Node.js application. Using the editor workspace, you edit these files. The IntelliSense built into the editor assists you as you write and edit code by providing hints for code completion. This feature helps you save time and ensure your code syntax is correct. As you work, you can check your files into GitHub using the built-in source control view or by issuing Git commands from the integrated terminal. By integrating with GitHub, you can maintain versions of your work that help you better manage changes to your code over time. Now that you're getting comfortable with Visual Studio Code, you decide to install a Visual Studio Code extension that can add to your productivity by making your code's format easier to read. You search for and install the Prettier extension. When you're ready, you can test your application and see how it looks by using the built-in debugger. After you launch the restaurant's website, you can continue using Visual Studio Code for the other projects you're working on for the restaurant. To prepare for developing the inventory application, you download and install the Microsoft C/C++ extension and the Microsoft Visual C++ (MSVC) compiler toolset. This setup enables you to run and debug C++ code on your computer. To configure Visual Studio Code for performing data Inventory application, you download and install the Microsoft C/C++ extension and the Microsoft Visual C++ (MSVC) compiler toolset. This setup enables you to run and debug C++ code on your computer. To configure Visual Studio Code for performing data analytics for the restaurant, you download and install the Python extension, which also contains the Jupyter extension. If you don't already have Python installed on your computer, you also need to download and install a Python interpreter. After you install a few extensions, a compiler, and an interpreter, Visual Studio Code is set up so that you can develop several different applications. Furthermore, you kept your code editor lightweight by adding only those features you need. Next unit, when to use Visual Studio Code. Continue. Continue. Need help? Help. 1. Suppose you work for a company that manages a code repository on GitHub. Programmers are required to commit code regularly to this repository. Which feature of Visual Studio Code helps you meet this requirement? Visual Studio Code doesn't support this feature. You can install a code formatting extension for Visual Studio Code. You can use the built-in source control feature of Visual Studio Code. 2. Suppose you're developing a tour of Visual Studio Code. 2. Suppose you're developing an Android app. Should you use Visual Studio Code? Yes. Visual Studio Code supports Android development out of the box. Maybe. You can install extensions to support Android development in Visual Studio Code. However, a better HTTP the official Android IDE. 3. Rust. How would you determine if Visual Studio Code can support this programming language? You search the extensions marketplace to determine if there are Rust extensions. You determine that Visual Studio Code doesn't support your team's needs because Visual Studio Code is a lightweight editor that supports ACE to determine if there are Rust extensions. Learn. Documentation. Our goal was to help you evaluate whether Visual Studio Code is a suitable choice for your programming needs. We developed the following criteria to guide your decision. Is there an official code editor or IDE for the programming language or framework I'm using? Does Visual Studio Code support the programming language or framework I'm using? Do I want a code editor or IDE with a small footprint? Do I need source control integration with my code editor or IDE? You applied these criteria to building a website for a restaurant. Your analysis helped you determine that Visual Studio Code has the features you need, such as an integrated terminal, out-of-the-box support for Node.js that helps you start building right away, and the ability to install extensions such as Prettier to help make coding easier. As you work, you're able to run and debug your application within the UI. With Visual Studio Code's integrated Git support, you're able to commit your code files to a remote repository on GitHub. The criteria also helped you determine that Visual Studio Code is an appropriate choice for developing a restaurant inventory system in C++. Finally, it helped you decide that Visual Studio Code is suitable for performing data science tasks in a Python and Jupyter Notebooks environment. You can apply these criteria to your own real-world scenarios and see if Visual Studio Code is a good fit for your programming needs. References. Set up Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio. Module complete. Unlock achievement. Need help? See our troubleshooting guide or provide specific feedback by reporting an issue. Feedback. Was this page helpful? Yes. No. English, United States. Theme. Light. Dark. High contrast. Previous versions. Blog. Contribute. Privacy. Terms of use. Trademarks. Copyright Microsoft 2023. Walkthrough, create and use a static library. Article. October 28, 2021. For contributors. Feedback. In this article. Prerequisites. Create a static library project. Add a class to the static library. Create a C++ console app that references the static library. Show 3 more. This step-by-step walkthrough shows how to create a static library .lib file for use with C++ apps. Using a static library is a great way to reuse code. Rather than re-implementing the same routines in every app that requires the functionality, you write them one time in a static library and then reference it from the apps. Code linked from a static library becomes part of your app. You don't have to install another file to use the code. This walkthrough covers these tasks. Create a static library project. Add a class to the static library. Create a C++ console app that references the static library. Use the functionality from the static library in the app. Run the app. Prerequisites. An understanding of the fundamentals of the C++ language. Create a static library project. The instructions for how to create the project vary depending on your version of Visual Studio. To see the documentation for your preferred version of Visual Studio, use the version selector control. Control. It's found at the top of the table of contents on this page. To create a static library project in Visual Studio. On the menu bar, choose File New Project to open the Create a New Project dialog. At the top of the dialog, set language to C++, set platform to Windows, and set project type to library. From the filtered list of project types, select Windows Desktop Wizard, then choose Next. In the Configure Your New Project page, Page, enter Math Library in the project name box to specify a name for the project. Enter Static Math in the Solution name box. Choose the Create button to open the Windows Desktop Project dialog. In the Windows Desktop Project dialog, under Application Type, select Static Library.lib.